The latest on the injury report for the Philadelphia 76ers, Joel Embiid, Eric Gordon, and more. We're going to break it down right here on Locked On 76ers.
You are Locked On 76ers, your daily Philadelphia 76ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome into Locked On 76ers. If you're watching us on YouTube, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe or wherever you're listening to our podcast. In addition, you can also check us out on the free daily newsletter on lockedondaily.com to get everything Philadelphia 76ers. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 off in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Keith Pompey, beat writer for Philadelphia 76ers. I'm Kayla, Santiago, sideline reporter for the Delaware Blue Coats, the Philadelphia 76ers NBA G League affiliate. Let's get into it, everybody. So we know it's on everybody's minds right now, the 76ers, but Joel Embiid, also a big topic of conversation. Keith, what have you been hearing surrounding the injury and that name, Joel Embiid?
I think like more or less, here's the thing with Joel. There's like a lot of information coming out, but the main thing is that, from what I've been hearing and what a lot of people have been hearing is, that Joel, there's some people that think that Joel still doesn't need a surgery. They feel as if that, is something that he can, possibly power through. He needs to get in better shape. He needs to, just work through it, bang with it. They feel like surgery at this particular time, if he has it, it could be something that puts him out for a long time. But the gist that I get is that, and I've been getting this for a while, that they never actually felt that he needed surgery for this. Now, the one thing that I will say is that the 76ers aren't prepared to shut him down either. Now, they will give him a rest, but as, it could change next week or what have you. But, as of today is Friday, but as of Thursday, it was one of those things where they still feel like, Joel is capable of playing, coming back and playing, and the 76ers going on a run. I think when we talk about how Joel Embiid is going to be remembered, I think that when we talk about it, it's like right now, let's just say because here's the thing, he's trying to get a surgery to make sure to get his knee right. You know what I mean? To get him to playing at the optimum level. I don't think he would have a surgery just to have one. I think he's going to have one just to make him better. And it's not even about Tyrese Maxey, I don't think. When we talk about how will Joel Embiid be remembered, it's more so, how will you remember him? Like you look at Joel Embiid, like here's the question. There's only two ways to remember him. Do you remember him as the most dominant player to play for the 76ers in your lifetime? I mean, you know what I mean? Like they had Allen Iverson, and like I'm saying, in your life that they had Allen Iverson, Joel Embiid, or are you going to remember him as a guy who was often injured? You know what I mean? A guy who couldn't get his team out the second round. A guy who, let's face it, who's only played 19 games this year, 30-something last year. So when we talk about remembering him, like, no offense to Tyrese Maxey. No offense to Ben Simmons, no offense to any of these other guys. They're not on Joel Embiid's level right now. Joel Embiid's the MVP.
Yeah.
So how do you remember him? And to me, it's like I think I'm gonna have to remember him on a guy as far as a guy who was never able to fully live up to his potential. Let's say if this is it. Because I remember him as a guy who came in as a rookie and didn't play his first two seasons, right? Then I remember him as a guy in his third season who played in 30-something games, right? But then I also remember him as a guy that when he was healthy, he was the most dominant player on the floor, right? Yeah. But you have to say that if Joel Embiid, if it's over for him, it has to be one of those things where he's going to be remembered as a guy who hadn't reached his potential. So that's how I remember him. I want to know, how will you remember him if he can't play again?
So it's interesting because from somebody that grew up around the Philadelphia area, and I was a 2000s kid, a late 2000s kid in June, I never got to see the prime of Allen Iverson. So in terms of my lifetime being on this earth and watching basketball, he's the best player I've been able to see in his prime. With that being said, you still give your flowers to AI in terms of the 2000s because of what Joel Embiid wasn't able to do. He wasn't able to bring his team to the NBA Finals. I think for me, it's a little bit tough right now to look at it and say, okay, how can you look at and remember him? If it was all said and done right now, I look at it from a point of view of he showed how dominant he could be as a singular player, but the team player aspect wasn't there and he wasn't able to get his team over the hump. And I understand that the co-stars, this and what have you, but we're talking about the centerpiece of it all, Joel Embiid, because you even look at Nikola Jokic.
I just want to know, forget the
if you look at
just
you
him.
look at Nikola Jokic though too, and he didn't have so many superstars around him, and he still carried and helped. Now, granted, he did have Jamal Murray, but at the same time, he carried his team to the finals. He was able to do that. Joel wasn't. So I look at it as somebody that was a fantastic individual player that had a lot of good awards to his name, the scoring title, probably one of the best unique skill set centers. As an overall player, though, it's a little disappointing because when you look at it, you say he had the skill set to do it, but he couldn't bring his team to do it at the same time. And when you look down the line and you look at the history as of late, I shouldn't even say history because it's not that far gone, but if Joel Embiid was healthy, maybe the Ben Simmons passed up dunk and maybe the James Harden's performance in the playoffs doesn't matter as much if Joel Embiid is healthy. That's what I look at that as.
Here's the one thing about that. I'm glad you brought that up because, and I feel bad for Ben Simmons got criticized, but Joel Embiid was trash in that game too, right? I mean, he was literally trash and a lot of people done it. And that's another way that Joel Embiid is going to be remembered. In none of those game sevens that Joel Embiid played in, he played well. He struggled in all of them, right? So that's another thing. But the crazy part is for him, it's also one of those things where there's always been something else. It's like, okay, Joel Embiid played poorly, but Ben Simmons passed up that shot. Oh yeah, Matisse Thybulle fouled the shooter, right? But Joel Embiid was turning the ball over left and right and shot for a poor percentage. And then what was it? When they played Toronto against Kawhi Leonard, he struggled in that game too. So, that's part of his legacy. His legacy would also be, how do you remember him? A guy who failed to get his team out of the second round. So that's part of it. But everybody wants to, pile on his teammates. But he was the star. I mean, even against that Boston Celtics game, remember when it was him and James Harden, they was chucking threes and missing them. You know what I mean? And Doc got fired. And then at the end of the game, Joel says, "We need help." And everyone's looking around but dog, you and James were gunning, chucking and missing. You know what I mean? And then the coach gets fired. So, there's a lot about him. And I don't, the thing is, a lot of people want to talk about his teammates, what they didn't do. But if you go back and you look at history and those big moments, Joel Embiid struggled as well in the second round. Not the first round, but the second round.
And I think you can only make that excuse too if Joel Embiid was somehow able to bring the team to the finals in the years after as well. Okay, Joel comes back, he's healthy, he makes a run with Paul George and Tyrese Maxey. Then you look at it and say, okay, he maybe still didn't perform well, but at the end of the day, he was able to bring his team to an NBA championship, which, that's not going to happen this season. So when I look at it from that standpoint, you look at the injuries, you look at an injury-prone type of player, and it is unfortunate when you look at such a talent where his body just can't handle, I feel sometimes, his dominance at the same time. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that can happen. He gets the surgery. if he needs it, if he wants it, and it prolongs him maybe even into a little bit of next season, or he doesn't get it and he's playing through pain, and then he's never going to be 100%. But if he does get surgery, how many times can you get your body repaired before it's broken at the end of the day? So, it's a really tough situation for Joel Embiid. And right now, I think his legacy, and I know his legacy is kind of on the line, because there's a big question mark for what Joel Embiid is going to do post this season, or even as of right now with the Philadelphia 76ers. So we're going to talk more on injuries a little bit. We're going to flip the coin to Eric Gordon in just a moment. He had some bright spots with Philadelphia 76ers this year, but he won't be having them anymore this season. So we'll touch on that on the other side. And when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you missed the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. When I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make sure you make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, so Eric Gordon expecting to miss 3 months after having that injury to his right wrist. And Eric Gordon is somebody that, it was an interesting pickup in terms with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I personally liked what he was able to do, especially before his injury. It seemed like just as he started to really get going consistently, an injury comes about. He averaged just under 7 points per game, shooting 42.6 from the field, 1.7 assists, 1.2 rebounds. Keith, this is a team that all of a sudden we're hearing wants to go on a run, wants to make a push, maybe seeing that they're just on the outside looking in of that 10th seed in the play-in picture. And Eric Gordon, now granted, they were able to get some shooters and things like that, but Eric Gordon consistently, when he was on, was a good piece off the bench for the Philadelphia 76ers. And again, he's a vet, maybe not as consistent as we might have liked to see him this year. But at the same time, that's a little bit of a tough blow, but it is what they expected with the surgery coming up.
Yeah, you talking about as far as him being gone for the season?
Yeah, gone for the season. Yeah.
I mean, it's a tough one. But the thing about him is, you talked about his impact. You kind of feel sorry for him. Like, he's a guy that's 36.
Mm-hmm.
A guy who's been in the league for 17 years, right? But the thing is it's kind of sort of, it was on pace to be one of his worst seasons initially early on. And then people got injured. And what happened is Nick Nurse started playing him. And Eric Gordon, I give him credit. I always say, hey, Eric, like, things aren't working out for you, this and that. He says, Keith, it's all about me getting minutes. I'm used to playing 30 minutes a game. If I start getting minutes, I'm telling you, it's going to flow. And I felt like early on that he was a little stunted. And what I mean by that is it was like one of those things. He would come out, he would make a mistake, he would do this, and he would get a quick hook, and he wouldn't play anymore. And then when they had injuries, it became a point where next thing you know, they couldn't take him out. They had to keep him in. And then all of a sudden we're seeing like 4 3-pointers in a quarter and things like that and a space setter. So, and then it got to one point where, he was shooting 52% on 3 at one point during the season, like during a stretch. Yeah. So yeah, he's good. But you kind of knew when they signed Lonnie Walker, you knew Eric Gordon wasn't coming back. Right. And, the disappointing thing is that, the Sixers waited forever to release it because you kind of knew that's what it was, because Jared Bayless had something similar and he was out for a long time. So, Yeah, but yeah, he's a good guy. A dude that you miss. You hope like he has a player option for next season. So he has up until June 29th to pick that up. So I would assume, unless he has a better deal, which he probably may not have at his age, you assume that he's coming back next year.
Yeah, and I think for the 76ers, they can get all the shooting that they can get at this point, especially when you're talking about just a little bit of that spark off the bench. And I know a lot of people have been up and down about Eric Gordon, especially how he started out the season, I think was a little bit disappointing for fans to look at and say, oh, they thought they're getting the Eric Gordon of the past. And you just have to be real with yourselves, people, that he's older in his career. He's a veteran, and he was able to really make some good plays and everything in between later on in the season, right before his injury. So it looks like he is going to be done for the season after that surgery. And the 76ers definitely going to need somebody to step up in his footsteps. You talk about Walker, you look at Grimes as well, other pieces that if the 76ers can get them to consistently shoot, whether that's in the starting lineup or off the bench, they're going to need a little bit more of a push because they lose that with Eric Gordon as well. But we're going to touch on a little bit of the 76ers and Warriors coming up. More focused on Philadelphia, though, because we're still kind of, waiting at this moment for the Warriors trying to win their 5th straight right now as we're going to preview that game coming up. So don't go anywhere because we'll see what the 76ers need to do in this contest and what we want to see them do as well. Check that. That is 8:30 on Saturday, the tip-off time. So we will touch on that on the other side. All right, so not as much here on the Warriors, Keith. Now, this is a team that, minus the Magic game right now, that has had some pretty good and commanding wins. They defeat the Hornets. They defeat the Mavericks, 126-102. Then the Kings, 132-108, 105-98, the final against the Houston Rockets. And I think for the 76ers, now we don't know at this point in time who's going to be all out there, if anybody's going to be sidelined or anything like that. But at the same time, the 76ers did show a little bit, and I know we don't love to use the word morale against the Knicks, but they did show more effort in that game than we've seen in the last 2 games, at least. I don't see them coming out with a win against the Warriors, but I want to see more ball movement. I want Paul George to continue what he was able to do, especially later in that game with the Philadelphia 76ers against the New York Knicks. Maybe this no podcast thing is actually a good thing, or it could have been just a big coincidence after just one game after he made that statement. But if the 76ers are serious, and what Paul George kind of said is them wanting to go on a little bit of a run here to try to get that 10th seed, these are games that you have to give it your all. What do you want to see from the Philadelphia 76ers against the Warriors?
I want to see them come out there and wave a white flag.
Oh.
I mean, I don't know. Like, at this particular point in time, it's hard to keep saying that. Like, here's the problem. The last time they played the Warriors, they were playing their best basketball, and they got boat raced. It was one of their most humiliating losses, right? So now you look at it, when we think of the 76ers, what's their weakness? Their weakness is perimeter defense. So, when you look at it, it's kind of like, hey, you got to play better perimeter D. Steph Curry, since Jimmy Butler's been there, he's looked like the Steph Curry of old. Jimmy Butler, we know that he attacks. He's not like a 3-point shooter. He's a guy that likes to get to the rim, right? We also know that Draymond Green has an extremely high basketball IQ, right? So to me, when we say, like, what do we want to look? And, we're going to say, like, I want to see some fight. But at the same time, I honestly believe that, everybody talks about the effort that they had against New York. And I'm not trying to like basically downplay that. But they showed me that a losing team, losers find ways to lose in the end. And they got to get over that, right? But I also think that the 76ers are hyping up effort. They're saying all this other stuff. Why? Because they want the fans to think we're getting better. Surely we're going to get better. Well, we're going to see how much better they are tomorrow night when Steph Curry comes to town. I mean, Steph Curry had 43 points midway through the fourth quarter against the Orlando Magic, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to see. We're going to see how much this team is for real. And remember, that Golden State loss was one of their, at that time, it was their worst loss of the season when they went there. And like, I think it was the 1st or 2nd of January. That was their worst loss of the season.
And when you look at it too, interesting enough for the 76ers, they're making the comments of wanting to stay in it, wanting to compete. And you kind of look at the teams in front of them and the schedules that they have ahead and the teams that they need them to lose in the Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets as well. The Bulls take on the Raptors, which is a game of two teams that are probably really not looking to win too many games, although the Bulls have been competing. They competed against the Clippers the other night, just a 122-117 loss. Of course, they beat the 76ers on Monday as well, a big dominating win against Philadelphia. The Bulls making themselves look like a team that wants to compete to stay in that spot. And then they play the Raptors. That's tonight at 8 p.m. On the other side for the Nets, they take on the Portland Trailblazers. So the 76ers are in a weird spot right now because they have the worst losing streak in the NBA, one of the worst losing streaks in the NBA at 9 games. It hasn't really been this bad in terms of longest losing streaks since we alluded to back in the 2015-2016 season. Of course, the streaks were a little longer back then, but it hasn't been this bad in terms of that. For the 76ers, I mean, how much longer do you give it until they're just like, okay, we're going to sit everybody and actually wave the white flag? Because all of a sudden you think, okay, well, Joel Embiid goes down and there's talks of crazy ways to, give him surgery and help his knee and everything in between. And then all of a sudden the next day, you hear Paul George saying, well, I'm going to go off the podcast to focus on this year, because they're trying to keep fans in the game. They're trying to keep fans from coming. They're trying to keep fans from being able to watch this team say they want to compete and that they want to try to get that 10th seed. But realistically, it's just not working out. They're a really bad team. They're going up against the Warriors. And when you look at the schedule, Keith, for the 76ers, it doesn't get any easier. You play the Trailblazers, you go on the road to Minnesota against the Timberwolves, then on the road in Boston. Then maybe the Jazz is a game you can win on March 9th at home at the Wells Fargo Center. But this schedule doesn't get any easier for Philadelphia. And I'm wondering when they are going to wave the white flag too, because some people might have gotten hyped from a few nights ago, but it's their 9th consecutive loss. There's not much to get excited about when you're looking at this team from the outside looking in. And as we're covering it right now, the reality of the situation is 9 straight is something that is going to be tough to come back from if they're trying to get into that play-in spot. So when I look at this, I don't side with Paul George, I guess you could say, in the sense of they're trying to go on a run, they're trying to compete, they're trying to do this, they're trying to do that. I just think it's talk to have the fans to continue to stay kind of on their side a little bit. But the Sixers team, Keith, is in some really, really dark territory, you could say, in terms of the schedule they have coming up in those next few games.
Well, the thing is, they have 24 games or something like that left. The thing is, the Sixers have the 4th easiest schedule, right?
Good
so
point.
They have tough games coming up, but they have the 4th easiest schedule. And when you look at it, even though they have a 9-game losing streak and they're 1-10 in their last 11 games, or 1-10 in the month of February, rather, right?
Yeah.
They're still 2.5 games out of the play-in tournament.
It's crazy.
So they're not going to really shut that thing down until they basically realize they're eliminated. Because the problem is, yes, they lost to Brooklyn twice. Yes, they got boat raced by the Bulls. But outside of that, those teams have been struggling as well. So whereas the 76ers, if you look at it, so the 76ers are 1-9 in their last 10 games. The Chicago Bulls are 2-8. And then you look at the teams below the Sixers, if you talk about tanking, they're 2.5 games ahead of the Toronto Raptors. Well, the Toronto Raptors are 2-8. The Charlotte Hornets are 2-8. The Washington Wizards are 3-7, talking about the last 10 games. So when we talk about shutting it down and everything, I don't think they want to shut it down just yet because of these teams are struggling. And another team that they're going to play, the Miami Heat, are 3-7 over the last 10 games. And Miami Heat are the 8th seed. So the 76ers are looking at it like, yeah, I know it's been bad, but if we can just go and play 500 basketball the rest of the way, even though it sounds like a tough task, they feel like they'll make it in the play-in tournament.
It's bad, and it almost could be worse in a situation where you're looking at it and you're saying, well, they're not going to be bad enough to probably realistically get that number one pick. And you don't want to be in the middle of the pack where you don't make the play-in and you don't get a number one pick. So what do? What side of the coin are you flipping on? And the reality is they are realistically still in contention for that number 10 spot. And it's interesting, too, because when you look at the Western Conference, things are just so different between the East and the West. It's like two different worlds this season. The Warriors right now, they're in 8th. They're still trying to work up to see if they could possibly avoid a play-in spot with the Timberwolves and the Clippers above them, just a few games back between those two teams as well. And then you look at the team in 10th over in the Western Conference, the Kings with 30 wins. So a very, very different story, because if the Sixers were in the West, we're not having this conversation. The 76ers are absolutely tanking. There's no hope for them to come back into this playoff picture here when you look at both of these conferences. But we're looking at the Eastern Conference right now. They would be in that 14th, 13th spot if they were in the West. So in the East, there still is an opportunity for the 76ers, and we'll see what type of momentum they come out with against the Warriors. The Warriors are really red hot coming into this game against the Philadelphia 76ers. Steph Curry, especially if he plays in this contest, is going to be a major problem. He is for every team and definitely will be for the tough perimeter defense for Philadelphia. So we will wait and see on that game. Once again, that is tonight in the Wells Fargo Center at 8:30 p.m., or we should say Saturday, March 1st, at 8:30 p.m. as well. So that'll be a game that we will discuss afterwards, in addition to that too, right here on Locked On 76ers. Well, thank you guys all so much for tuning in to this edition of Locked On 76ers. For Keith Pompey, I'm Kayla Santiago saying so long. Let us know how you're feeling on 1 to 10 about Philadelphia at this very moment of the season, and we'll see you guys next time.